Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a couple minutes, or a minute. All right, good morning and welcome to our webinar session today. My name is Shelly James. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at Exciting. Today, we're going to talk about handling of EAM scenarios such as emergency users with audit compliant logging. And this is part of our Support Pack 17 enhancements that have been pushed out this year. Our presenter today is Alessandro Banzer, our SAP Security and GRC expert. A couple things to mention before we get started. This is one of several new webinars that we have planned for this year. We have one more scheduled to focus on Support Pack 17. And there should be a slide at the end of the presentation that will tell you about that when it's coming up. And we will be working on some additional ones before the end of the year. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can use the questions panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. Just type in your questions. We will keep an eye on them. And then at the end of Alessandro's presentation, we will try to answer those, or in between whenever we find good breaks. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive a link to the recording from GoToWebinar. Later, you'll receive an email from our marketing team to follow up and make sure you got all your questions answered. If you have any additional ones, please send them back to the marketing email or to me at sjames@exciting.com, and we can help answer them offline. Now that we have those items covered, I'm going to hand things over to Alessandro, and he's going to walk you through today's session. Alessandro.
Perfect. Thank you, Shelly. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Let's talk about extended access management, EAM scenarios with the Exciting Authorizations Management Suite. Before we jump in, just a few things about us, who we are, for those of you that don't know us just yet. Been around since 2008, originally from Switzerland, as you can tell from my accent. I'm not American native. We have offices throughout Europe. We are in the United States since 2016, and in our global company, over 100 employees. We have different recognized expertise statuses with SAP in the area of governance, risk, compliance, data security, and so on. And also, we're a SAP Gold partner, education partner, and all our solutions are fully SAP certified. That means everything that we do within SAP standard. We're following SAP's best practices and their standards, and everything that you see today, everything that you will ever see about our tools is always 100% SAP certified. It also means our tools can be used in the S/4HANA cloud. So if you're a cloud customer and you want to install our tools, for example, you want to use it in like a private cloud setup, for example, on the HEC, our tools are certified. That means SAP will gladly install them for you. With that being said, let's jump right into the topic. I don't want to waste too much time here. As Shelly already mentioned, this is part of the Support Package 17 upgrade. So we'll talk about, like we did in the past, a little bit about what the emergency access management, the functionality we have, is all about, and then we'll look into what it does, what it offers, how it works, and also what's new with Support Package 17. So if you have been using it in the past, and you want to just know what's new, there's a couple of new things that are, I think, very interesting, very good new approaches that we'll target on as well. The emergency access management is basically the module Exciting Times in combination with the role builder. So it's very often a combination of the two tools that we use for different use cases. We use it for the productive test simulation, where we can test roles in the background without negatively impacting end users. That's also the functionality of Exciting Times and role builder. Also for protected go live scenarios, when we have a go live, when we have fallback scenarios, or automatic delta role generation for RFC users. All that is part of Exciting Times and Role Builder. With those two modules, or Exciting Times in particular, we can also enable emergency management scenarios, or privilege access management, or firefighter, however you want to call it. I think those terms are interchangeable. Very often we just call it a firefighter because that's a common term, but that's also just one of many functionalities that Exciting Times as a module offers. So today we're primarily going to look into what we have to offer for those emergency concept scenarios with Exciting Times. As we all know, when it comes to firefighter or emergency user scenarios, there's a lot of challenges, especially if you don't have any tools today. That's a manual process, which I have seen many times. The biggest problem is always, audit compliant. How do we make sure that assignments are, authorized or approved before they're assigned? How can we understand what happened during a session? How can we do proper review, audit compliant review of a session, to understand what happened, what was done, what wasn't done, and so on. So it requires approval procedures. It requires audit compliant review processes, so we can properly document certain emergency sessions. And then, the entire coordination thereof is usually very challenging if we have no tools. So I think the challenge is pretty straightforward. What do we offer with the XMS? What are a few of the things that we do? Obviously, we have, as part of the firefighter capabilities, we have all the ones I just mentioned. So we have approval procedures where we can have firefighters available through an approval workflow. So that means, if a user is going to use emergency authorizations, they have to have it approved first. So before they can use the firefighter, it needs to be approved. We have the scenario where a firefighter is available, so it doesn't need an approval. We can just use it, and then there's maybe a review workflow after that. But from an approval perspective, we can have either pre-approved, so they are available to the users for their use, or we can have them set up in a way that it requires an approval before they can be used. The entire approval process is obviously audit compliant. That means we have everything logged. It's going through SAP standard workflow. So we're using the SAP standard workflow engines for that. That means we have an approval step that is customizable, where a firefighter owner that's nominated. If the firefighter is requested, the owner receives an email with a work item as form as a workflow, and then the owner can either approve or reject that request. And if approved, then access is granted. The user who was requesting the firefighter can use it, and vice versa. If it's rejected, obviously the user will not get the access to use it. Also, for review processes, we can enable review processes after a session concluded. So the review very often includes all the log files and different information that we can gather throughout the session, and we'll get to that in a little bit, how much we can log. If you compare with, for example, like SAP Access Control or even IHE now, the new cloud solution from SAP that also has emergency access scenarios. SAP standard in Access Control, it's logging 4 or 5 different log files. We do over 20. So we have way different and it's a different approach that we're using, and therefore we can also log and document and pull different change documents from the system because we're using a different approach. But we'll get to that in a little bit when we look into the system. Also, one of the biggest differentiators that we have, especially comparing our approach with the way SAP does it with Access Control, is that our emergency user is based on the actual dialog user. So if I'm using extensive authorizations, emergency authorizations, that emergency session where I'm using the additional authorizations is still in the context of my user. That means I'm not using a technical user like in Access Control with the ID-based firefighter, where we're basically we have to define service accounts, technical service accounts that an actual user like myself can use. And then basically I'm logging into that user account, and everything I do will be logged and documented in that technical user ID. So from a transparency perspective, if someone goes back and does some investigation or looks into change documents, they will see that a firefighter technical ID did a change, or they did a posting, or they changed a user, they changed a role, they changed master data, and so on. It always shows the technical ID. In our case, the ID will always be the end user. So if I'm logged in as Alessandro, then the change documents will be in the context of Alessandro. It will not be a technical ID. That's because we're using a different approach to firefighter. That also means that because I'm not using another session, all the settings I have, like printer setting, my favorites, everything like that is still there because I'm still in my own context, in my own user context. That's very important. How does it work? It's very simple. So from principal perspective, what we're basically using is the SAP standard reference user. So instead of using a technical ID, we just have reference users, and reference users don't allow a log on to the system, but the reference users allow to extend another user's user buffer. So we can extend users' authorizations. That basically means, and we always talk about our backpack approach or backpack principle, where we basically have the user that has the standard authorizations, where I'm missing some, and then I require the emergency authorizations, and those emergency authorizations are going to be assigned kind of like in a backpack scenario. So the backpack is the reference user. That reference user is defined with roles, profiles. It's a regular user in SU01 that we can maintain, and we'll give additional authorizations to that reference user, and then that reference user can be assigned to a dialog user. That's what Exciting Time does. So when I request access, either through a workflow or if it's been pre-approved, if I start a firefighter session, then Exciting Times will make that assignment. At the same time, it will trigger log files and all the features that are running behind to track and trace what I'm doing during that period where I'm using the firefighter. So I can request it for 1 hour. If the hour is up, the access will be taken off. I'm gonna lose my access, and there will be log files written. We'll take everything, and then if we have a review workflow enabled, it will go into the review. But the way it works is through the SAP standard reference user, where we're extending the user's authorizations. And that also means if this white guy here, if this is me, that's my user, I'm staying in my own context. I'm not logging in. I'm just getting more authorizations directly to my user. We're using this because the SAP kernel works the way that if there's a reference user assigned to a dialog user, then those authorizations will always be evaluated first. So if there's an authorization check, it looks first into the authorizations of that reference user. If there's something missing, it will pull it from the dialog user. But the reference user, in an emergency scenario, has extensive authorizations, so it will pass there. And then what we can do, and we'll see that here in a little bit, the tool will then also have a full authorization trace, and we can also compare. So I can see what authorizations were used from the reference user, what authorizations were used from the dialog user. Maybe all I needed was just one value. Everything else was from my standard roles. I just needed one value because I didn't have the authorization to change. Maybe I was able to display, but I couldn't change. And that change now came from the reference user. And there we can clearly see as well. So we see what exactly was used in addition to the dialog users' standard authorizations. And that's usually how it works. We have, depending on the scenario, obviously, if you have a firefighter that has sub all, then this graphic doesn't make a lot of sense. Then the red one would be way bigger. But most often it's like that, especially in like business scenarios. Let's say we have a firefighter for example, to open financial periods, OB52, for example. It's one specific authorization that's very critical that we don't want to give. They want to have monitored. A lot of companies do that. Then it's just one very specific authorization that can be requested through a firefighter. And then it kind of looks like that. So the user has all the authorizations as always, and then the one transaction or the one authorization that the user needs just for an emergency or for a critical task comes through the reference user. And then that delta, to really understand what was used from the reference user, that's what we can analyze as well. So that's the delta where we can see what was specifically used from the backpack, from the reference user, that the user doesn't have. That's in a nutshell how it works. We'll go into the system here in just a bit to get a first impression as well. For existing customers, so what's new is support package 17. There has been a new status for the review. So if there's a review in place, so far there has just been either it's been, it had no status, basically it was in review, but it wasn't completed yet. So it was still kind of like in progress, but we couldn't specifically say it's in progress. It was just pending, basically. Now what we can do is we can put the status in progress. That means I'm aware I have to do a review. I'm working on it, but I'm just not yet ready to approve or to do any corrective actions or whatsoever. It's in progress. So I'm working on it. I can actively now set the status as in progress, so that if someone reviews the different log files to see where they are, have they been approved or not, I can see the approver, the reviewer is working on it. It's in progress right now. Then we have the new enhanced options for the PDF documents that we can create for the review, especially in the case of for change documents, like change documents from different functions, like user. If you do user change, that's change documents in finance, in materials, and so on. There's different ways how we can do it. I'll quickly show that as well, but we can activate, deactivate, and say how we want to do that, and we can also combine them into one. So different ways how we can do that. We already had in the past possibilities to do additional approvers and do escalation approvers. So we were even able to add second approvers based on tables. So we were able to maintain a table where we said, okay, if the approver is Alessandro for this firefighter, that's sub all, I also want to have a second approval. Or we had deputization possibilities. So in case, let's say Shelly is on vacation and she has an approval due, then we can say, okay, Alessandro is her deputy. I can take over for her or can review that in her name and do it on behalf. That was only possible so far with a table, so we always had to maintain a table. Now that's also possible via authorization. So we have authorization objects where we can control that. Just a different way of doing that. One thing that's very interesting, I think, is what we call the delayed session start. So if we have firefighters, emergency users that we have to request via workflow, that means from a process perspective, I go into the system and I say I need a firefighter. And then the workflow starts. So if I request it now and I need it now or need it tonight, whatever the case might be, I request it now, the workflow starts, Shelly is my approver, she approves it, the session starts. If the session is only for 1 hour, it starts right after, or it used to start right after she approved. So maybe I requested at 9 o'clock in the morning, she approved it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, then the session started. And maybe I wasn't ready for it. Also, if I had something for tonight, let's say I have to do emergency tonight because we have a system upgrade, whatever the case might be, I'm a basis person, I don't have SAP all in production, but maybe I have to do certain things over the weekend or in the evening, then what I can now do, I can now request sessions, workflows, or firefighters through workflow for a delayed session start. That means I can now go ahead and say, hey, we have maintenance window coming up on the weekend, Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, I need SAP all. Shelly doesn't have to work on a weekend. I request it on Thursday or on Friday before and say, hey, I want to have that session start at 9 o'clock Saturday morning. That means we can run the workflow during the week, during regular business hours, and then I get the firefighter assigned to me Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, the way I requested it. So that's what we call delayed session start. I think that's very interesting, especially for all of you that use the firefighter for more like the basis task that's more predictable and plannable, especially for upgrade windows and stuff like that. I think that's very interesting. Also with the with the session time. So our session, the minimum that a session can be requested for is 1 hour. So we cannot go lower than an hour. The increment is by the hour. And in the customizing, we are always able to define that a firefighter can be used up to X amount of hours. So if I use a session, the maximum session duration can, for example, be set to 8 hours. That means I can use it in the morning, in the evening, it will be taken off. I don't want to, it's kind of to limit that a user doesn't have a session for 2 weeks, because often that's not what we want for emergency situations. We want them to use it, and then once it's done, we want to have it off. So the session time is defined in the customizing per firefighter, where we can say, finance firefighter can be used for 4 hours or 8 hours, or maybe just 1 hour. But let's say it's 8 hours. We say a maximum of 8 hours. In case someone needs it for the full day, it can be up to 8 hours. When the user requests the session, they can request it up to 8 hours. They cannot request it longer, because that's the maximum defined. But what's possible is that the user requests it for 1 hour and then does the work. And then after 55 minutes, when he realizes, oh, the session is about to end, and he gets the warning that the session will end in 5 minutes, he realizes, oh, actually, I'm not done yet. I need it for another 30 minutes or for another hour. And then what we can now do with SP17 is we can extend up to the maximum that's defined in the customizing. So if I have it requested for 1 hour, the maximum would be 8 hours. I could have, but I only did 1 hour, and I want to extend it after 55 minutes because I'm not done with my work just yet. And I can just say extend it, and I can extend up to maximum of what's defined in the customizing. I think that's also interesting. For those of you that are using SAP Fiori, especially if you have all the end users on Fiori, we now have dedicated SAP Fiori applications to request the firefighters, the emergency users, and also for the workflows. So that's fully UI5 built applications now that are the look and feel of Fiori and are true SAP Fiori applications. These are the main changes that came with SP17. A few other things that I would like to show. Let me quickly jump over to the system. So let me just log on to one of my test systems here. What's important, again, just for those of you that haven't seen it yet or maybe haven't used it yet, we can see I'm logged onto my system with the user Abe Answer. So that's my regular dialog user. And here we obviously, to start a firefighter, we have a transaction code. The transaction code is called /n/exciting/times_multi. That's just the transaction name. That's basically the logon transaction to start a firefighter. And that's a transaction that obviously has to be given to all the end users so that they can start the firefighters. Now what we see here, when we go in here, we can see I have multiple different reference users, or firefighters are basically the users itself that are assigned to me, so they are available for me to use. Can see some have been properly documented, some are just my test users, so it's not super pretty here, but I hope you still understand. So we can see different users I have available. If a user, let's say we have a user for like here for BC Basis, a firefighter that has SAP All Access, and we want to give that to 10 people in Basis that should be able to use it. All those 10 users can use that firefighter at the same time. That's also a big differentiator to SAP Access Control, because with SAP Access Control you're using an ID. That means you're logging into a different user ID. Now if that user ID is taken, someone is using it, no one else can log in because someone is in session right now. Otherwise you would kick them out. In our approach, every user that is assigned to that reference user can use it at the same time, because the context is always the dialog user. So we're not using, not doing any logons. That's why that's possible. So also not a thing to keep in mind. We can see here, depending on the reference user, they can either be requested via workflow, or they are just available to me and I can just request them. I can just use them. So for example, that RBC Basis, the SAP All user, is just available for me. So I could just double click here on request, and I can go ahead and request it, and the session will start right away. So this doesn't require an approval. On the other hand, the ones here with the workflow, let's say the one here, firefighter production issue, I have to request via workflow, and here I have to request it, and then it will go in a workflow, it will go to the owner. So here I'm the owner myself, so I can show everything. Will go directly there. The request screen, as we see here, is always the same. So, or not always the same, it is a little different, but it's pretty much the same approach. We have the request reason, where we can basically provide a template to what's shown here. What most of our customers do, they have something like a template where it's like reason, planned activities, something like that. So it's like a predefined template, so that when the user uses the firefighter, the process is that they go in here, they say what's the reason, what are the planned activities, and maybe something else. Maybe you have, I don't know, a change document or whatever numbers you wanna put in here. That's something that can be customized, so that the template's there, and they just have to fill it out. We have certain fields that we can enable, like for example the incident. If you want to relate a firefighter session back to an incident, then we have an incident field that can be customized, like here, just shows up here. We can make it mandatory that that has to be provided, so that before the request can be started. Once I fill out the reason, I can fill also in the duration. That's again up to the maximum that's defined in the customizing. So if that firefighter can only be used for 8 hours, then I can only request it for up to 8 hours. I can say here 1 hour. Like I said, that's the smallest we can go. It's by hour increment that we can go. And then also here, what we can see is that delayed start behavior. So it's customizable. We can still use the old way. So if you guys are using already the firefighter and you just have it start once it's approved, that is still possible. But we can also now have that delayed session start. So where I can say, hey, I want to start it, and that's kind of like what it's now. I don't want to start it at 4 o'clock. That's the time of our system. I want to start it at 8 o'clock tonight. And again, the approver has to approve it before that, but the session won't start until 8 o'clock. If it hasn't been approved, then obviously it won't start, but it needs the approval first. But if it's been approved, then the session starts at 8 o'clock. That's that. And what's also new, which I think was also new, we can now also attach attachments. So if you have a process to provide additional information or some evidence why you're doing certain things, or you need a ticket, something like that, or screenshots, stuff like that, we can also attach attachments. So we can upload attachments here to that session. That's also something that the approver will see. So if it goes to an approval workflow, the approver can see it, but we'll also see it in the review. So if you need to attach a change document, if you do productive changes, something like that, or must changes that need to be documented, then we can also now attach the attachment. That's also, I think, very interesting. Let's just quickly do this. We just requested for 1 hour. I don't do an attachment here, and I just say continue. So now obviously this is now, we can see this is now going via workflow. So it's a workflow item that's now started. I as the user, I can always terminate. So I can say, hey, I don't need it, and I just cancel that workflow. It will cancel, and the request will be done. That's possible. Otherwise, now it's waiting for an approval, and then the session, once it's approved, will start at 8 o'clock. How does that look like from an approval perspective? It's super simple. The owner, in this case, the approver, will get an email with a link. They can click on it, and then it goes to the business workplace. I don't have the email set up here, so I just go manually to the business workplace. And then here I should actually have a workflow item. I'm glad it worked. It's not always guaranteed when I do demos that it really works. But so here, basically, again, we're using SAP standard workflows. So it looks the way it looks. This is just SAP standard workflows. Obviously, with the link you would get here directly, or then if you use the Fiori, I think would be a little bit nicer. But at the end of the day, what can we see here? We see there's a session requested. So I can see there's a session requested for my user with this reference user for that system. I have here, unfortunately, it's in German. So our system has been set up in German. So a lot of the stuff is German. But basically what it means here, it says that the session will start at 8 o'clock for 1 hour. And I see a couple of you guys speak German, so that should be fine. And obviously all that can be fully customized. It's just an email template. You know, again, in our system, it hasn't been properly translated to English. Otherwise, it would be in English. And then obviously here, what can I do? I can approve, I can reject. That's now my duty as the approver. I say approve, and then it's been approved. Now, obviously, the session doesn't start right away. We can see that as well. So if you go back here and I refresh, we can see it's not running yet. It's pending. It's basically, it says pending approval window. That basically means, you know, we're waiting. It's not yet ready, but at 8 o'clock, that session will start. That also means if we go to, just very quickly, to SU01, just to show you, if I go to my user, where the reference users eventually will be assigned, we can see it's not assigned yet. The tool will assign it at 8 o'clock sharp, and then the session starts. So that's very important. Perfect. And you know, again, that was with the workflow. If I use just like a regular one like this one, if I just request it, here again, the same screen. I know I can have a template here. I can request it and do whatever. And now, obviously, if I do it, the session will start right away. So if I do this, you can see my screen just refreshes. That's just so that the authorizations get loaded into the user buffer. And now if I go to SU01 and I look at my user, we can see that the reference user has been assigned. So now that reference user is assigned to me, the session has been started right away because there was no approval required. I have the additional authorizations from that users. We can also click here, then we can see the roles, the role assignments from that user. I mean, in this example, it's a profile. So we will get the sub-all profile from that reference user. And now I have the extensive authorizations. Obviously, I already have sub-all, so I don't need anything, but that's basically technically how it works. So it's been assigned by our exciting times, assigned here, and now the session is running. Obviously, now everything I do will be logged and traces. There's different traces, and let me show you that. I just quickly go to the customizing just to quickly show you. So we have different customizing that we can do. And when we look into the logs and emails, we can see what logs that we can provide. So there's different logs that we can enable for different users. Either we can say for all of them or just for specific users, or we can have them all active and we inactivate for certain users. That's also possible. Mostly we activate all the logs for all the users. And when we see here, as I was mentioning before, SAP-Access Control has 4 or 5 different logs that it pulls. The standard logs like system log, security audit log, the certain change documents, and statistical usage data. That's what Access Control does. We have 23 different logs that we pull. So everything that Access Control does, but then we also have specific exciting reports where we have different change information from the CD tables, which is very interesting, and I will get back to that in just a second. But then also very specific logs, like for example in regards to the authorizations. With Access Control, there's no authorizations. We don't know what kind of authorizations they used. We can see that they went into transaction SCC4, but we don't know whether they were doing display or they used change. Unless they really change and we have a change document and the table records a change document, we wouldn't even see it. With ours, we obviously also see that. We also have, not only do we have a full authorization dump, so we have full trace during that session, all the authorizations are recorded, but we can also compare. And that's basically here where we have a comparison, where we can compare between the dialog users authorizations and the ones from the firefighter, from the reference user, to really understand what additional authorizations were used from the reference user that the dialog user didn't have. Because the standard navigation I have myself, I just got additional, and I want to understand what that additional authorization is. And excuse me. And then obviously a whole other stuff, you know, like security audit log, system log, change documents, change history. There's different report, different log files that we can pull and then add into that PDF document that we can send out via email, or if, you know, we also log into tables, so that obviously from a audit perspective, it's recorded and we can go back and see what logs we have. So that's very interesting. A lot of logging, obviously. And also we can also excuse me, enable customer logging programs. So if you have custom programs that do some certain thing of logging, then we can also pull those in. Okay, so we can even enhance our logs with if you have something custom, or if you want to create something that we don't have, then it's also possible. We have that documented as well to extend. One of the things that, yes.
We have a couple questions you might want to answer before you move on.
Okay, let me look at them very quickly. I didn't see them. Just give me 1 second. I have to open it here. Why doesn't it get bigger?
So the first one says, can we add attachments when we terminate the session or only when we do the initial checkout?
Yes, let me, I'll show that in a second. That is possible. I'll show that. Let me quickly read the next one. I'll show that in a second, so I'll just get back to it in a second. Then there was a question regarding reference user, because we're using the reference user. What if a customer already uses the reference user? We can put it back. There's customizing possibility to put the reference user back. That's one thing here where we can say put back the standard reference user at the end of the session. That is possible to some extent. Yep, and then everything else we'll get to in a second. So the first one that was just with the, so I was showing that when a session starts, we can document. Now, obviously, when I start a session, I don't always know exactly what I'm going to do. You know, maybe I'm investigating a productive issue, and I know I'm looking into certain transactions, but I'm not necessarily sure what my action will be, or it could be that I find an issue and I have to correct it, and I haven't documented that when the session starts. So obviously what is possible, and we'll see that, let me quickly go back here to the Launchpad that we saw earlier. Oops. Yeah, that's when I talk and type at the same time. So give me a second. So obviously here we can see this is the one where we're currently in session. So when you just double click on it, you can also terminate and you can document certain things and add additional comments. That is possible. What sometimes happens is that, let's say that the session is up and I forgot to document, or I did something and I forgot to type it in. There's also something we can also do post session completion. So what we can do, we have what we call allow explanation for auto terminated sessions. So if a session terminates and I haven't done the documentation yet, we can also request that later on. Again, it's in my context. So if I log in, I'll get reminded that I have to document, and then I can document it. That's especially important when a session just auto terminates, where a user didn't do it themselves. The time was up, it was terminated. Then we can also document it post session completion. The one thing I wanted to show is that change logs. So we have different change logs that we can pull, and this is a little bit this is something new with SP17 as well, where we can define, you know, what type of change documents do you want to pull. You can see here I have everything enabled, so everything has been active. They're all available, and so basically here, you know, we can go on different objects to pull the change documents. Obviously, change documents we can only pull if the transaction or the table records change documents. So if we do, like, for example, table changes, that was always a question. Certain tables don't have table change log. then obviously there's nothing we can pull. So the tables need to be enabled to have table change logs. Certain transactions have that automatically enabled. Otherwise, here it would also give us an overview. If it hasn't been enabled, it will show, or then we can also directly enable it from here. But here we can also specify more specific, which change documents we want to pull. And you can see here it's an extensive set, or let's put it that way, it's the most common change documents that we see. Those we can also specifically here implement or activate, and then also take out if we need to. Hope that makes sense. The review again is workflow driven. We get emails. We can do email logins with PDFs. So we basically get a PDF document attached to the email. So if the reviewer doesn't do an approval in the system, but they still want to get it as a PDF, and then they save it somewhere else. I have certain customers, they do that on SharePoint. That's the way they store the proof of the session has been reviewed. They put it on SharePoint. Then we can get that by via email as a PDF document that can then be further processed. That's a possibility. Or we use the SAP standard workflow for it, where we get the workflow item, we get the change documents, PDFs, and also then table form to see what happened during the session, and then we can give the approval within the system. That's also possible. Log files, let me just quickly pull one up here. I'll just quickly go in here more from an admin perspective to see what we have. Let's just quickly do it like that, and let's just see if we have some that we can do. So this is just obviously just the plain data that I would see as an admin, where I can see what dialog users used a firefighter, which reference user did they use, when was it created, how long was the session, who requested, what was the reason, who terminated, did the user terminate themselves, was it automatically terminated, when did it terminate. All that information is here available. Also, if there's an incident number, we can see it. We can see what different mode it was. From a review perspective, certain have a review, and then we can also see here the status. So where we can say, okay, this is relevant for a review, but the session is still running, so it's still, oh sorry, that was R. So if it's R, it's relevant for review, it's still in session, not concluded yet, but once it concludes, there will be a review. A will be the session has concluded and it's now waiting for a review, so it's pending. Then that's the new status with SP17, where we can say it's in progress. So the approver or the reviewer received the work item, is aware of that, is processing it, and he put it manually onto in progress. So working on it, it's in progress, and if it's been finally reviewed, then we have it completed. So we can see that also here. We see when it was reviewed, by whom, and so on. And obviously what we can also see here is the spool document that will be sent out as a PDF and in different forms to the reviewers. And here we can see those log files. So we can see here, like for example, here we have different type of log files that were pulled. And if I pull up a different session, the documents might be different, because depending what the session was about, there were certain change documents, others were not. Certain ones are always there, like for example the authorizations, they're always there because whatever the user does, it does an authorization trace. But for example, change history on users, RS users 100N. If the firefighter didn't change a user, there's no change documents for users, so that one wouldn't be there. Would be maybe something else. What we can see here is obviously this is a different change documents. Again, they will be as a PDF. This is more the technical view, but we can, for example, see here. We go for example the authorizations. We can see, okay, this was the test user. These were all the authorizations that were used during that session with the return code, so we can see whether they were successful or they had a failed authorizations. Also in which context, so there were different authorization checks when the user was running SSE4 as a transaction code. So we see that this is just the full authorization trace, and then obviously we can also see, for example, the coverage with the authorization. So we can see that user used these authorizations. So it was for different objects, and then we can see here which authorizations were missing. So we can see the user used SCTS admin, and the dialog user doesn't have the object at all. So it's not even having the object in the regular authorizations. There was another authorization used for STabu-num with activity 02. The user has the object, the field, but not the value. That means the user has obviously STabu-num and an activity, but not 02, probably 03. And that's basically where we can then also see here in great detail what were the authorizations that were missing from the dialog user that had to come from the reference user. Again, that comparison, the gap, to see that's very, very important to understand. So different type of logs, obviously change documents. Here again, here we don't have any change documents for this one. But that's basically what we would see. We would see if there was anything, here someone changed the system, changeability, there was debugging, all that stuff would be logged, would be in a log file. Again, here just technical view, that will go out via email as a PDF attachment, or then obviously in the workflow, if the user would use the workflow, they can also see it in this form, because different form, whatever the user prefers, they can use it. Perfect. So that's in a nutshell what we do with Exciting Times in form of the firefighter. Like I said, it's a different approach than SAP users with access control or IAG. What happens is always in the user's context. So we're leveraging the reference user to provide additional authorizations, and we're not leaving the user context. I think that, to me, is one of the most important things and one of the most critical differentiators, I would say. Everything stays in the user's context, and that's very often what we want from an audit perspective, but also just transparency in the system. If especially those customers, or if any of you, if you have excessive usage of firefighter, and that I see that a lot. We're misusing the firefighter for segregation of duty remediation. Instead of having SOD conflicts, we give certain functions in a firefighter, like the one I was mentioning before, OB52, to open periods in finance. That's one I see very often. It's just given through a firefighter, so the users don't have the SOD conflict on their user, and then it's kind of like a misuse. So if you start doing everything SOD remediation through a firefighter, so that the user doesn't show up with conflicts, but they still have all the access available to them, they can do whatever they want to do, it's an excessive use. Now, if you look into tools like fraud management, or it's now called integrity scanning, where you want to understand the correlation between bookings. So someone created a PO, and then we did goods movements or whatever to that PO, did invoicing and so on. If that's in different users, so if I did activity 1 in Abe Answer and then activity 2 in FFID2, then it's hard to have a tool analyze that was the same person, that was maybe fraud. If everything happens in the same user context, it's much easier to analyze, because that happened in Abe Answer, that happened in Abe Answer, and I can see, hey, he booked his own purchase order, for example. So that's from that perspective, I think a big one to remain in the same context. And also for just change documents, if someone goes in the system and says, hey, who did I change there? FFID2. Then they have to understand who did it, so they have to go back to GRC to see at that time when that was timestamped, who did use it. Oh, it was Alessandro, so it was Alessandro. But you don't see it directly in the system. With our approach, you see that, and from that perspective, I personally think it's much better from a transparency perspective, auditing perspective, because we have that transparency and we can always see who did what, and we can also use additional tools like integrity scanning, for fraud detection, and so on. I think that's to just wrap this up. Shelly, are there any other questions? Other than that, I would say that's pretty much it. That's what we do with Exciting Times in context of firefighter. I think we have the questions covered.
No, there was no additional questions.
Perfect. Then
Yep. So thank you, Alessandro. Remember that we have one more session scheduled for information around Support Pack 17 for the XAMS tools. We will again be updating our list of additional webinars that might be coming up this year. And there is a YouTube playlist that this will be added to, and you should be getting an email that shows that information also. And if you haven't received that or don't receive it with the next email that you receive, let us know. You can email Alessandro at abanzer, B-A-N-Z-E-R @exciting.com, or me at sjames@exciting.com. Let us know and we'll send it out again. Every session will be part of this playlist. So if you bookmark the link, it will update automatically the next time you go in to see the new sessions. We typically upload the sessions every about 48 hours after the session occurs, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the next session. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
thank you, Shelly. Thank you, everyone.